Awesome. So we're live. Blake, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for having me. Great podcast and awesome to be here.
Thanks, Blake. Very excited to have you on here. So, CEO of Flippa, you're the OG in the marketplace. You guys are some of the original ones that have been around and selling websites from early internet days. Tell us a little bit about Flippa and kind of your journey up to this point.
Yeah, it's a marketplace to buy and sell digital real estate. So right in your wheelhouse, it's all about digital assets. It's all about online businesses. So sites, stores, apps, and online businesses. It's peer-to-peer. There are brokers that operate on the platform so they can represent you. They're third parties. They're external to the Flipper ecosystem. But for the vast majority of people, it's true peer-to-peer. So someone might own a blog. That blog might be 5 years old. That blog might be doing $5,000 a month in revenue. Maybe it's doing $2,500 net profit a month. You then list that up on Flipper, and then the Flipper algorithm takes care of the rest. En masse, buyers will start inquiring and asking you lots of questions. And so we're benefited by having the biggest buyer base on earth for digital real estate, which is something we're proud of, something we're excited about. And I guess the good news about that is it means we're more democratizing the exit. It's for the small and it's for the big. So we see transactions as low as $500 and we see transactions as high as $20 million. So it's true democratization of the ecosystem.
And one thing about your platform that I've always loved is the layout of it is very easy to understand the business. You can understand the numbers. It's very easy to communicate with the seller, which I've always loved. So I don't know if you started with the UX in mind or if that's something that you changed, changing the wheels on the bus as it's flying down the road or what you did to that. But I've always been impressed with that. Can you walk us through some of the user base? You guys say you're the largest marketplace in terms of buying and selling and transactions. What type of users are typically on Flippa? If I was going to go sell my company, who would I expect there?
Yeah, there's a couple of really surprising things. One, buyers are sellers and sellers are buyers. And then probably the other thing to recognize is that 40% of all buyers are repeat buyers. So they're not just buying one asset, which is really, really interesting. So they'll typically start off with something a bit smaller and then they mature through this industry that you and I both know so well. So a bit more detail on that. A seller is most likely to be a small business owner who is using the current asset to either supplement their income or it is their primary income source. So in effect, it's their job. So they're full-time bloggers, they are SaaS business owners, they own e-commerce. On the buy side, you've really got two types of buyer. You've got the entrepreneur and you've got the investor. The entrepreneur, similar to the seller, they're looking to either supplement their income or what we say is they're buying their next job. They're going to replace their income in full. And then investors are there to do one of two things, right? They're either there to optimize an existing portfolio. So they're going to buy an asset, add it to the portfolio, derive some optimization through their existing experience and some of the services and resources they have around that portfolio and do that with that new asset. Or they have a specific industry in mind and a specific category in mind, and they are buying businesses that fit that particular, fund methodology or fund approach. So you've got the entrepreneurs, you've got the investors. They're either replacing or supplementing their income, or they're using it as part of portfolio approach.
I love that. I think there's, I typically see that too, Blake, where you've got people who are building the same type of company over and over and over again, or they're making the same tweaks and they've really kind of nailed one thing. And then the other people who might be, acquiring something to go full time on, or even just do it on the side. And I always say some hobbies make money and some hobbies don't. And sometimes people build websites on the side or build businesses on the side and they happen to make money. Can you walk us through like maybe the timetable? I know there's an auction type format on Flippa. What's the typical timetable? Like if someone was to go on there and either buy something or sell something, and how does that work?
Yeah, so I've got to be careful with my answer because sometimes sellers do expect things to go super quickly, and that can happen. So deals can be done literally within 48 to 96 hours. That deal will typically be a really well trafficked, very heavily search engine optimized blog that is generating revenue through AdSense or Amazon Associates. So they're the businesses that literally fly out the door. You list them. It's the number one search on Flippa is Amazon, and that means Amazon Associates in this particular context, or AdSense. So they're going to fly out the door because there's just so many buyers for them. They're easy to assess. You look at revenue as a percentage of traffic, and you do a revenue to traffic ratio. So they're really quick. They can fly out the door within 96 hours. On the flip side, let's say you've got a $1 million to $1.5 million e-commerce store based in, well, you can hear the thick accent. Let's say it's based in Australia. Most of our business is actually in the US, but there's a particular case, toyuniverse.com.au. It was an online toy retailer, sold for around $1 million US, and that was on the platform for 5 months. So I know that's not a good answer, but it is between super quick, under a week, all the way through to 5 or 6 month territory. And it just depends on, do you have a niche that is specific to only a few buyers in the world, or do you have something that so many people are after?
And I think with that first example you gave where you've got really good SEO, you've got a lot of traffic to a site, those are snatched up very quickly for the portfolio buyers, right? They've done this before. They know how to go in and switch out the AdSense with Ezoic or somebody else.
Yeah.
Whereas, a $1.5 million e-commerce brand, you're actually pulling in from a lifestyle standpoint.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, there was just a really quick example. It was called Personality Max, and they were doing personality testing, but it was essentially a blog, and it sold at auction. It was $1 reserve. Now, clearly it was going to sell for a lot more than that. It sold for $250,000, and it sold for $250,000 within 30 days. And that's essentially one of those examples of where buyers have a specific interest in it because the topic's not going anywhere. People will always do personality tests. The content on the site was super rich. It was less well optimized from a revenue standpoint than it could be. And so buyers looked at that because buyers pay for performance, but they look for opportunity.
I love that. A lot of times sellers want to pay for potential, and it's kind of the other way around, but there has to be some left of a potential and ROI for the new seller to kind of take, or for the new owner and buyer to take over. Now, you mentioned this deal went pretty quick, right? So 250K in 30 days. So say, for example, they win the auction, what's the typical kind of deep dive, or do they do the deep dive throughout that auction, or is there a 2-week window after the fact to make sure everything's buttoned up and correct, or what does that look like?
Yeah, it's super interesting. Now, when it's an auction, there's lots of back and forth between buyer and seller, but deep level due diligence will happen post. When it's not an auction, deep level due diligence will typically happen pre-offer acceptance. And that's, I guess, just the differences in the sales approach. So in that particular case, because it's happening so fast, you are heavily reliant on a listing which has a heap of detail, call it prospectus level detail. So you'll want to know how old the site is, what platform it's being run on, what its gross revenue, net profit, and gross revenue and net profit range is, page views, unique visits, SEMrush authority score, all of that stuff's inbuilt into the listing, right? It's there for everyone to see. SEMrush will come in automatically. Google Analytics is connected by the seller, as is AdSense. If it's Stripe or WooCommerce, they're also connecting the data, which is what we call verification at the source. So that stuff's going to have to happen through the actual selling process. And then once the offer is accepted, they'll go to an LOI and an asset purchase agreement, which is when a due diligence period will actually take place. If it's not an auction, what you'll find is there'll be a conversation about value, and there'll be a offer in principle, but due diligence happens pre-offer acceptance.
Yeah, thanks for breaking that apart, because it's helpful to understand how the auction typically goes. And I know you have a lot of different type of buyers on there. You've got funds on there. Just for listeners out there, they might be thinking, hey, someone just had 250K lying around in cash. How do you see most of these deals on Flippa finance? And it probably ranges, you get to the 1.5 million, it's a little bit different, but how are people financing a lot of the deals on Flippa?
Yeah, so I don't know what where are you? You're in Utah?
Yeah.
I don't know what the real estate market looks like there, but where I am, what often happens is first-time buyers are beaten to an asset through experienced buyers who are cashed up and have a lot to throw around. And that is challenging, and it's akin to what happens on Flippa. So you are up against really well cashed up, either individuals, but more likely funds. And so that's to say that the vast majority of deals are done on a all cash basis, but it's not to say it's the only way deals are done. So deals can be done obviously through SBA financing. Deals can be done on a seller financing basis, which is a really, really interesting opportunity and approach that a seller can take to achieve a higher sale price, as long as they're content and comfortable with the idea of a longer payment period. There's also a bunch of people getting unsecured loans from various entities, typically banks. Now they're for smaller assets, literally $10,000, $25,000 size assets, where you can get an unsecured loan. You can use that for whatever purpose you want. It happens to be they're using it for digital real estate. So there are deals done of all types and all structures. There are earnouts for bigger deals. You know, typically you wouldn't want to see an earnout for a deal under $1 million though, because it's too difficult to predict. But I hope that answers the question. It's a long answer, which is that there's multiple ways deals can get done. And unfortunately, we're all up against these very, very cashed up buyers who are typically institutional or funds.
Yeah, and I would imagine 10 years ago when Flippa was kind of really the only player in town, these deal sizes were significantly smaller. 10 years
Correct.
in, you actually have a lot of cash in the market because of these funds that have come in and realized, hey, the internet's not going away. These are great cash flowing assets. And to answer your question about Utah real estate, it's insane right now. So everybody on both coasts just moved to the mountains, Jackson, Park City, anywhere cool. So we're kind of experiencing that too. Now, what are some of the overall trends? And I just hinted towards some of that, where 10 years ago, it was kind of a completely different game and it was the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
Now you're seeing a lot of private equity firms get into this space, a lot of roll-ups. There's some companies making big waves, raising hundreds of millions of dollars here in the States. What do you kind of see just in overall trends in the marketplace in terms of, deal size and transaction level, the amount of deals in the marketplace?
Yeah, great question. Well, let's talk about the insanity that's going on with Thrasio, right? So $1.75 billion raise, correct me if I'm wrong. That's all happened in the last 6 months, and they're there buying up the 1%. So the 15,000 Amazon sellers that are dominating that merchant ecosystem and are doing over $1 million revenue or thereabouts. Now, the good news is that while all these funds are in the market, and clearly that's a trend, and that's the trend that everyone wants to follow. If FBA is hot and these institutional investors are moving that way, it tends to be that individuals want to move that way too, because it seems safer. So clearly Amazon's still a trend in that regard. It's been around for a long time. We know that, but it's not going anywhere. Merchant acquisition for Amazon is fast growth. I think the number is 1.5 million Amazon merchants. And so with that, clearly there's a trend toward Amazon FBA, and we see a lot of interest there. So that's piece number one. And that's probably just coming as a result of how many firms there are playing in the space and everyone else wanting to follow that trend too. The second one really relates to SaaS, and for obvious reasons. It's a recurring revenue stream, at least if it's a decent SaaS business. It's more predictable. Your operational cost base tends to be more manageable over a longer period of time as you start to get a payback window, start to understand your payback window on any one of those paying subscribers. So they're quite predictable. It's a sexy business model right now, right? Everyone wants to buy a SaaS business, even if they've never worked in one or understand it. That's clearly a trend. And so people should be aware of what to look out for there. You want churn rates below 2.5%, 2% a month. And you're looking for a payback window of hopefully less than 6 to 9 months. So I'd say that they're the two most obvious ones to us. On the buy side, I think what's really interesting though is that most people think that people who have set up a fund are interested in big businesses only. And that's in fact not the case. So what we're finding is that there's a whole bunch of funds that are set up to buy hundreds of smaller assets, hundreds. And so we have publishing entities, we have agencies, we have ad tech firms who are buying smaller assets. And when I say smaller, it's obviously a relative term, depends on your experience in the space. But by smaller, I mean $15,000 to $50,000 assets. There are people looking to literally buy hundreds of these a year. And we have examples of these buyers. They're literally spending $1 million, $1.5, $2 million on the platform per annum. But when you go and look through their portfolio of assets, they're micro. And so that's an interesting trend we're seeing as well. I'm not entirely sure. I think it's different for every fund as to why they would go and do that. But often they're buying content sites and they want eyeballs.
Yeah, and they're probably able to just, it's probably a revenue and multiple arbitrage when you think about if you have a higher tier with Mediavine or Ezoic or something like that, and you can apply it across 50 sites. I just think about the operational nightmare that you might have with 50 of those sites or something like that. But, if you've got the team in place, you can kind of rip them out really quickly. And I'm sure the operation is really critical there.
Yeah.
What are kind of the unique mistakes that you might be seeing just in 2021 when people are making an acquisition? There's a million mistakes of people not doing enough due diligence and things like that. But what are some of the unique ones that you might be seeing just for our first-time buyers out there?
So the first one is buyers will buy something they're not passionate about. And that's not a good idea, because inevitably, as you and I both know, the word passive gets thrown around a lot, and there's almost nothing that is truly passive. And so if you're not actually passionate about either the business model, i.e. you want to understand the science behind the business model, or the industry, i.e. health, fitness, shoes, whatever it might be, then you're kind of setting yourself up for failure, because your runway is probably a year at best before you want to get rid of it. And even then, you might not have enough passion through that first year to actually run it as well as the previous owner. And that's the biggest problem we see. You have to envisage and visualize yourself running at least as well as the previous owner, because otherwise you're getting yourself into hot water and you're not going to get that ROI. So that's number one. Does that resonate?
Oh man, you nailed it. I love that. It's so true. You're not going to have more passion than the person who started the business.
The second one is people get their eyes light up when they see a fast growth business that has been run off the back of Facebook ad spend, quoting a ROAS of 2.5, 3, 4, 5, even up to 10 times sometimes. Now, Facebook ad marketing isn't actually that simple. So if you are an expert, you can do it with your eyes blindfolded or your hands tied behind your back. But if you are new to Facebook marketing, if you have a pixel, which it hasn't been warmed up, and a history of having strong audience development backbone or audience creation methodology with Facebook, you can find yourself being wowed by the growth trajectory of an asset and having no ability to continue that at the levels that somebody else has previously done. And so that comes down to expertise. Don't get yourself into a position where you are buying something just because it sounds easy versus actually is easy.
It's really interesting you said that. 2 hours ago, I met with a private equity firm based here in the US. And I specifically said, what companies do you like and which ones do you not like in looking in this space? And they said, we do not want something that is based off Facebook advertising. It sounds, they've done a decent job of making it very simple for the first time person who goes in there. But it's kind of like Google PPC. If you've never done it before, you're going to get your lunch taken from you.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So
it's probably, again, why people love content sites that are driven by organic traffic and SaaS businesses, which have low churn. They're more predictable in operation.
With a lot of the talk in some of the other marketplaces out there, raising a fund, has Flippa ever thought about raising a fund? And what are your thoughts on, if you were to raise a fund, what that would look like?
Super interesting question. I think there will be the Thrasio for apps, the Thrasio for content, the Thrasio for this, that, and other. and it has come up in discussion. I don't think it works for us. I think we have almost every fund in the digital real estate space, and I'm not talking about those who are looking to, they're private equity looking to buy unicorn level businesses. I'm talking about funds in what we consider to be the micro asset space. We have them all booked on Flippa. They're registered, they've got profiles, they're actively shopping. So to go head to head with those funds and think that we can carve off a subsection of our deal flow and attach ourselves to that and run an unbiased marketplace, I don't think that's in Flippa's DNA. Flippa has always seen itself as a place that is enabling a pathway to exit for every small business owner worldwide, obviously digital. And so when you have a mission like that to enable a pathway to exit for any small business owner worldwide, you have to play, there's some level of impartiality which is required in that strategy. And so it maintains that you've built a technology base which is built on the backbone, built on a matching algorithm backbone. And so I don't think we're going to go and suddenly start competing with our own tech, which does all the matching work. But I think it's a really interesting concept. I think a lot of people will do it. I think for us, it'll be more about embedded financial services. So how do you actually make it easier for sellers to sell on the basis of access to capital, or buyers to buy on the basis of access to capital?
Yeah, so really doubling down on what you all are good at and what you've been doing for so long, and facilitating the transactions so they're even more smooth. Have you ever thought, and I'm sure you guys have, now I'm just curious about the, the Flippa business model. Have you ever thought about subscription or a pro tier for Flippa?
You cut out there quickly. Was the question a pro tier for Flippa?
Yeah, because sometimes marketplaces will have different tiers and you get access to deals earlier, or just you get more information quicker, those types of things. Have you ever thought about a subscription?
Yeah, so clearly there's some people playing around in the space, isn't there? The short answer is yes. Again, we've thought about it. The longer answer is, I think that you are unlikely to get to a scale where the unit economics makes sense. You're essentially a membership business, and everyone is after deal flow. And so what that means is there's a point where people have either bought what they want to buy, in which case they don't need to be a member anymore, or people are forever waiting for what they want to buy, and they're consistently beaten out by other people in the membership base. And so I think that there is a natural tension between the business model and the ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think there's a lot of people in the space, and a lot of people are doing different things. And I love the approach that you guys have gone about it. And you said it earlier, just democratizing the buying and selling of assets, right? And making this process simpler. But before we end, if you could get, before we jumped online, Blake, we talked a few different things, and we talked about, businesses in this micro level, a lot of times can be life-changing. Do you mind talking a little bit about what you've seen in the space? And it could be a concrete example, or just overall what you've seen in terms of businesses don't need to, change the world, but changing your own life.
Yeah, so we live by the mantra of own your future. And we had a conference in July last year in the heat of the battle, which was all about taking control, making decisions for yourself that can set you up to earn an income, replace your income, double your income, whatever it might need to be for you to feel secure and happy. And that's less likely to come from starting something, because you've got to find 0 to 1, and that's really hard to find. It's less likely going to come from working for somebody else, because there are some innate challenges with that. And it's more likely going to come from taking some calculated risks around investment into alternative asset classes. And of course, digital real estate is just one alternative asset class, but clearly we are advocates for it. And so if you can imagine making 25 to 40% annual returns through investment in digital real estate, clearly you need to know what you're doing. Clearly you need to do your homework, do your due diligence, make smart decisions. But that is a safe bet to place. And so we see this happen time and time again. There was a gentleman by the name of John Chen. He bought a business on Flippa for $7,500. He sold it 2.5 years later for $550,000. That's an awesome return.
What is that? 30x?
Yeah, 30x or something like that. and then the same gentleman sends me an email literally yesterday, or no, the day before, I'm mistaken. And he says, I'm trying to keep up. I bought an asset called Posh Shop in July. The business was doing $15,000 a month. And last month we did $180,000. This is a direct quote from John. He says, I'm just trying to hold on right now because it's clearly growing fast, right? So these are people who are in control, and that's super exciting. And it doesn't mean you have to buy and operate because selling means you're in control too. We've had examples of bloggers who had run crochet-based websites, as one example, who had operated that site for 20 years, sold it for $90,000 as they were going into retirement. Now, if I can pick up 90,000 USD on the way to retirement, that's better than picking up nothing. Oh. So these are awesome human stories, and that's all we're about at Flippa. Let's watch people take control, be it sell or buy, and be a little bit more in control of their financial future, which is super exciting to watch.
Blake, thanks so much for jumping on the show. We appreciate your insights. This has been incredible. Where can people learn more about Flippa? Where can they follow you? Where can they sign up for your newsletter?
Yeah, the first thing is jump to flippa.com. There's a little link top level of Flippa. It's called The Daily, and you'll get some nice insights there. It's free. You can unsubscribe whenever you want. You'll get some nice insights. You'll get 3 curated deals sent to you each day. And it's a nice place to start because you can learn a lot about the ecosystem just by subscribing. And we have hundreds of thousands of people receive that. So I'd start there. That's a good place to start. If you're looking for me, get me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions. Feel free to send me an email at blake@flippa.com. Pretty easy to remember. Or I'm on Twitter, I must say fleetingly, at Blake Now.
Well, Blake, we'll link to all that in the show notes. Thanks so much for jumping on the show. CEO of Flippa.com. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Awesome show.